A nurse signed a marriage contract with a cold millionaire CEO. What happened after wedding shocked everyone. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories every week. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. It was raining over the small college town in Texas. The sky was heavy, gray, and unkind. On the sidewalk, a young nurse named Clara Hayes pulled her thin coat tighter. Her shoes soaked through as she left the hospital after another exhausting night shift. She had been awake for 20 hours. Her paycheck barely covered rent, and her mother's hospital bills had eaten the rest. All she wanted was to make it home before the next storm cell rolled in. But before she could reach the bus stop, a sleek black car pulled up beside her. The tinted window slid down, revealing a man in a dark suit, his expression calm but unreadable. Ethan Cole. The name alone carried weight across the city, the cold, calculating CEO of Helix Medical Group. Most nurses only saw his face on hospital newsletters or investor posters, yet here he was, calling her by name. "Miss Hayes," he said, his tone even, almost clinical. "I need a word." Clara froze, clutching her tote bag. "Sir, is there a problem with my shift report?" He shook his head once. "No, this isn't personal." His voice dropped, deep and deliberate. "Marry me." For a moment she thought the rain had drowned out his words. "I am sorry," she whispered. "Marry me," he repeated. "Think of it as a contract, a professional arrangement." The rain hit harder, sliding down the car's roof like applause from the heavens. Clara stared at him, stunned. This had to be a cruel joke. The man sitting inside the luxury car was the youngest hospital executive in the state, rumored to have built his empire before turning 35. He was known for firing department heads without raising his voice. He was not the type to talk about marriage, least of all to a nurse wearing a faded coat and $30 sneakers. Ethan studied her in silence, his gaze sharp but not unkind. "I am aware of your situation," he continued. "Your mother's medical debts, the eviction notice taped to your apartment door. I can solve that tonight. All I need is your signature." Her breath caught. You went through my records?" He did not blink. "I have people who verify backgrounds. This proposal benefits both of us. I require a wife for 12 months. A marriage in name only. You will receive full financial security and a new apartment. After the term ends, you are free to leave. No strings attached." Clara felt her stomach twist. "Why me?" "Because you are honest," Ethan replied quietly. "And because you have nothing to gain by pretending." For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain softened to a steady hum around them, the kind that blurs the world into slow motion. She could hear her own heartbeat echoing against the car's door. A contract marriage? With a man she barely knew? It sounded insane, yet so did watching her life crumble piece by piece. Finally, she whispered, "You do not believe in love, do you?" His jaw tightened. "No. I believe in logic." "And you think a contract can replace love?" "I think a contract can prevent chaos." Clara looked down at her trembling hands, then back at his cold, unreadable eyes. Somewhere behind the walls of that car she felt a faint pulse of something human, pain maybe, or loneliness, the kind of emptiness no money could quiet. "Fine," she said softly, "but if this is a contract, I want one condition." Ethan arched an eyebrow. "Which is?" "That you never treat me like property." For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed his face, surprise, then something almost like respect. He nodded once. "Agreed." He opened the car door and handed her a silver pen engraved with his initials. "Sign here, Miss Hayes." Her fingers hovered above the document, trembling as the ink touched paper. The sound of the pen scratching across the contract felt louder than the thunder outside. When she looked up again, Ethan had already leaned back, his gaze fixed on the dark horizon ahead. "Welcome to your new life," he said quietly. Clara exhaled, rain dripping from her lashes. Somewhere deep inside, she knew she had just stepped into something far bigger than a deal, something that would test not only her heart, but his humanity. And as the car pulled away from the curb, the city lights smeared like watercolor through the rain, whispering the first secret of their impossible marriage. The next morning the rain had stopped. Leaving the streets damp and shining under the Texas Sunday, Clara woke up in a hotel room she did not recognize. The sheets were crisp, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish, and her old nurse's uniform hung neatly on a chair. On the nightstand sat a white envelope sealed with a silver crest, Helix Medical Group. Inside were the signed marriage documents, a new apartment key, and a debit card with her name embossed in gold. Her hands trembled as she touched the card. It was real. The impossible agreement from last night had turned into legal reality. She remembered Ethan's voice through the rainlow, certain, unshakable. Think of it as a contract. A soft knock pulled her from thought. A woman in a black blazer stepped inside. "Good morning, Mrs. Cole. My name is Rachel. I am your personal assistant from now on." Clara blinked. "Mr. Cole?" "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Cole asked me to escort you to the penthouse this afternoon." The words felt foreign on her tongue. Mrs. Cole. The title belonged to someone else's, someone poised, wealthy, and composed, not her. But as she looked at the mirror above the desk, she whispered to her reflection, "You signed this, Clara. You chose this." By noon, Rachel drove her downtown to a towering glass building that shimmered against the blue sky. The doorman greeted her with a polite bow. "Welcome home, Mrs. Cole." Inside the penthouse, the world changed colors. The marble floors reflected the skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a painting. Everything was quiet, too quiet. Clara followed Rachel through the living room, past the sleek piano and minimalist furniture, until they stopped before a set of double doors. "Your room, ma'am. Mr. Cole's office is down the hall. He is expecting you at 7 for dinner." Clara nodded, unsure what to say. When the door closed behind her, she sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the hum of the air conditioner. It was the sound of luxury and loneliness. At exactly 7, she stepped into the dining room. Ethan was already seated at the far end of a long mahogany table, his black tie perfectly centered, his posture straight. 2 plates waited under silver domes, untouched. "You are punctual," he said, his tone even. "I was taught to respect time," she replied quietly. He gestured for her to sit. A server poured wine, then disappeared soundlessly. For several minutes, the only sounds were the faint clinking of cutlery and the distant hum of the city below. Finally, Ethan spoke. "You will receive a monthly allowance and health insurance under my name. In return, you will accompany me to 5 public events in the coming year. You will maintain a low profile, no interviews, no personal statements." "Understood?" Clara nodded, her fingers tightening around the fork. "And what do you expect me to be at those events?" "My wife," he answered simply. The words hung in the air like smoke. For a heartbeat, Clara wanted to laugh, but his expression was stone. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "What happens if I fail to meet your expectations, Mr. Cole?" He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "You will not. I chose you because you will not pretend. Go do." Something about the certainty in his tone unsettled her. She wanted to ask why, but he stood abruptly, ending the conversation. "Dinner is over. Tomorrow, you will meet the stylist team. We have a charity gala next week." When he left the room, the silence pressed in again. Clara sat alone, staring at the untouched wine. Her reflection in the glass window looked smaller, almost fragile, yet there was a glint of defiance in her eyes. She whispered, "I will not be another name on your contract, Ethan Cole." The following week moved like a dream she could not wake from. Designers arrived with racks of dresses. Rachel rehearsed etiquette lessons, how to hold a glass, how to greet investors, how to smile without speaking too much. Clara memorized each motion like a nurse preparing for surgery. During one session, Ethan walked in unexpectedly. He paused near the doorway, watching as she practiced the right way to shake hands. She looked up, startled. "You learned fast," he said, his tone unreadable. She nodded. "Nurses have to." For a moment, their eyes met. Something flickered between them, recognition. Maybe respect, but before she could name it, he turned away. "Do not forget," he said softly, "this is only a performance." That night, Clara stood on the balcony overlooking the city. Below her, headlights streamed like rivers of light. She held the marriage contract in her hands, the ink already beginning to fade slightly from the rain that had touched it the night they signed. In the distance, she saw Ethan through the window of his study, still in his suit, staring at files under the dim light of a desk lamp. He looked nothing like the ruthless executive the world feared. He looked tired. She whispered into the wind, "You built an empire, but you forgot how to sleep. You could." As the wind swept through the balcony, she folded the contract and tucked it away. Whatever this arrangement was, she knew one thing for sure: she would not lose herself inside it. Because even if this marriage was fake, her dignity would stay real. The day of the charity gala arrived sooner than Clara expected. The Helix Foundation's annual event was not just another dinner. It was a battlefield of polished smiles, diamond bracelets, and whispered deals. Every journalist in the city was waiting to photograph Ethan Cole's mysterious new wife, the woman who had appeared out of nowhere. Clara stood before the mirror as the stylist adjusted the final pin in her hair. Her gown shimmered in soft champagne gold, delicate but elegant. She barely recognized herself. The nurse who once worked night shifts in scrubs had vanished, replaced by someone who looked like she belonged in those glossy magazines. Yet deep down, she still felt like an imposter borrowing a life she could never afford. Rachel entered with a calm smile. "The car is ready, Mrs. Cole. Mr. Cole is waiting downstairs." Clara took one last look at her reflection. "Let us get this over with," she murmured. At the entrance of the ballroom, the flash of cameras nearly blinded her. Ethan extended his arm, tall and poised in a black tuxedo. His touch was steady, cool against her trembling hand. As they stepped onto the red carpet, photographers shouted, "Mr. Cole, look here, who is the lucky lady?" Ethan leaned slightly toward her and whispered without moving his lips, "Smile. Do not answer any questions." She obeyed. The sound of shutters filled the air like distant thunder. For the first time since their wedding papers were signed, she realized how perfectly he could control a room without saying a word. Every eye followed him, every breath seemed to pause when he walked. Inside, chandeliers glittered above a sea of silk gowns and tuxedos. Waiters glided across the floor carrying trays of champagne. Clara felt out of place, but Ethan's hand remained steady on her back, guiding her toward a table near the front. Throughout the evening, executives and board members came to greet them. "Mrs. Cole," they said with polite smiles, their curiosity thinly veiled. Clara responded with quiet grace, remembering Rachel's lessons. Smile softly, speak briefly, never overstep. During dinner, a silver-haired donor turned toward her. "Mrs. Cole, I heard you used to work in one of our hospitals. That must have been quite a transition." His tone carried a hint of condescension. "Tell me, do you know much about cardiac neurology?" The table went silent. It was a trap-in attempt to expose her as nothing more than a pretty face. Clara placed her fork down gently. "Actually, sir, I do. I was on the night rotation for the neurology ward for almost 2 years. The difference between cardiac syncope and seizure episodes can be determined by the heart monitor's QRS pattern. Would you like me to explain further?" The man blinked, embarrassed. A few guests chuckled softly. Ethan's lips curved almost imperceptibly. Later that evening, when the speeches ended and the music softened, Ethan leaned close and said, "You handled that perfectly." "Tuayu." She shrugged lightly. "I was just telling the truth. That is what made it perfect," he said. For a brief moment, something in his expression changed. The cold distance melted, replaced by warmth that startled her. But as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. "Come," he said. "There is someone I want you to meet." He led her toward a quiet corner, where an elderly woman sat in a wheelchair, dressed elegantly but with a frail glow in her eyes. "Clara," Ethan said softly, "this is Mrs. Whitmore. She was my mother's closest friend. The foundation exists because of her guidance." Clara knelt beside the woman and smiled. "It is an honor to meet you, ma'am." The woman reached out, her hand thin but steady. "You have kind eyes, dear." Ethan was always too busy to notice kindness. Ethan looked away, his jaw tightening. Clara saw it, the shadow behind his composure, the loneliness that even success could not erase. When the gala ended, they rode home in silence. The city lights streamed past the car windows like falling stars. Clara clasped her hands on her lap, unsure whether to speak. Ethan broke the silence first. "You did well tonight," he said quietly. "The board members liked you. That will help with the quarterly vote." "So, I'm doing my job," she replied. He glanced at her. "That is one way to see it." Back at the penthouse, Ethan poured himself a glass of water, standing by the window overlooking the city. Clara approached slowly. "Mr. Cole," she said, "why do you always talk as if everything is a transaction? Marriage, charity, even human connection, it is all a deal to you." He turned, meeting her gaze with quiet intensity. "Because deals do not break hearts, Clara. People do." The words cut through the room like glass. She wanted to argue but stopped when she saw the exhaustion in his eyes. It was not arrogance. It was pain, the kind that hides under control for so long it becomes armor. Without another word, she walked to the kitchen, poured hot water, and set a cup of herbal tea beside him. "Then let this be one deal you did not make," she said softly. "It is just tea." Ethan stared at the cup for a moment, then took a sip. The warmth seemed to catch him off guard. "Thank you," he murmured, almost to himself. That night, Clara lay awake, listening to the faint rhythm of his footsteps pacing down the hall. For the first time, she wondered what it would cost to teach a man who trusted only contracts how to feel again. Outside, thunder rolled far away, echoing through the city. Inside the penthouse, something small but undeniable had shifted, like the quiet click of a lock beginning to open. Weeks turned into months. What had started as a paper arrangement began to feel strangely real in the quiet rhythm of their shared days. Clara continued her morning shifts at the hospital, refusing to quit even though Ethan had offered her an easier life. She said she needed to keep doing something meaningful. He never argued, but she noticed that each time she came home in scrubs, there was a faint hint of relief in his eyes, like her presence made the sterile penthouse a little less cold. Every evening she found him in the same place, the study overlooking the city, lights dimmed, a single glass of water by his laptop. Sometimes she would bring him tea without a word. Sometimes he would nod in thanks, eyes never leaving the screen. They spoke little, yet the silence between them began to change its tone. It was no longer empty. It carried the comfort of two lives breathing under one roof. One night, Clara entered the study quietly. "You have been here for hours," she said. "You should rest." Ethan looked up from a pile of reports. The dark circles under his eyes had deepened. "Rest is a luxury I cannot afford." "You can if you try," she replied. She set a cup of mint tea on the desk. "This helps with sleeplessness." He stared at the cup for a long moment before saying, "You always bring tea. Why?" Clara smiled faintly. "Because it is the only thing that does not need a contract." Something flickered across his face, an emotion he quickly buried. He lifted the cup and took a slow sip. "You should not care so much about a man like me, Clara." Maybe I do not care about who you are," she said softly. "Maybe I care about what you could be if you let yourself breathe." For the first time, Ethan did not have an answer. A few days later, he asked her to accompany him to a corporate board dinner. It was not a charity event this time, it was business. The board members, who had doubted his leadership after recent scandals, were gathering, and Ethan needed to prove his life was stable. Clara agreed, though anxiety lingered beneath her calm expression. At the dinner, surrounded by investors and sharp-suited executives, she noticed how tense Ethan was. His jaw stayed locked, his tone measured to perfection. But when one of the directors joked about his picture-perfect marriage, she saw Ethan's hand tighten around his glass. Clara reached beneath the table and gently brushed her fingers against his hand. It was a small gesture, unnoticed by others, but it was enough. His grip loosened. He exhaled slowly and continued speaking as if the storm inside him had never existed. When the dinner ended, he helped her with her coat. "You handled them better than I did," he said. She looked up at him. "No, you handled yourself better because you finally let someone stand beside you." That night, back at the penthouse, something unspoken lingered in the air. They walked past each other in the hallway, both pretending not to feel the pull growing stronger. The world saw them as husband and wife for convenience, but behind closed doors, the line between contract and connection was beginning to blur. The next morning, a rare thing happened. Ethan joined Clara for breakfast. He poured his own coffee, a quiet act that surprised her. "You are working the morning shift today?" he asked. "Yes, a double shift, actually. We are short on nurses." He hesitated before speaking again. "Do you need a driver?" Clara shook her head. "I prefer the bus. It reminds me of who I am." Ethan studied her for a moment. "You are not the same woman who signed that contract." She smiled. "Maybe neither are you." Later that week, Rain returned to the city. Clara was leaving the hospital when her phone rang. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. "I am sending a car for you," he said. "The roads are flooded." "I will be fine," she insisted. "I have an umbrella." "Clara," he said, his voice firm but concerned. "Do not argue. I am coming myself." Tomai. Within minutes, his black sedan pulled up at the curb. He stepped out, coat already soaked, hair damp from the storm. She blinked in disbelief. "You left a board meeting for this?" "You said you hate being alone in the rain," he replied simply. The words caught her off guard. "You remembered that?" "I remember everything you say," he admitted. They stood under the streetlight, rain pouring around them. For a moment, time felt suspended. He opened the car door, then hesitated. "You are shivering." Before she could respond, he removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders. It was warm, heavy, and carried his scent clean, faintly like cedar and rain. "Ethan," she whispered, "you will catch a cold." He smiled faintly. That would make us even. They sat in silence on the drive home, the rain tapping gently against the windows. Neither of them spoke, but both knew something had changed. When they reached the penthouse, she turned to him before stepping out. "Thank you," she said, "for coming yourself." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "You are my wife, Clara. I take care of what is mine." Her heart tightened. It was the wrong choice of words, but the right kind of feeling. She saw it in his eyes. He did not mean possession. He meant protection. That night, as she hung his damp coat by the door, she realized that every rule they had written in that contract was slowly dissolving, washed away by something neither of them dared to name yet. And for the first time since their wedding, she caught herself whispering his name not as part of an agreement, but as part of a heartbeat. The morning after the storm, sunlight spilled through the penthouse windows, soft and golden. Clara stood in the kitchen in her scrubs, pouring coffee into a travel mug when Ethan walked in, still wearing his robe. It was the first time she had seen him without a suit. His hair was slightly tousled, his expression almost human. "You are up early," she said, surprised. He nodded, rubbing his temple. "Could not sleep. You were talking in your sleep again." Clara's eyes widened. "I was? You said something about saving someone." She laughed softly, embarrassed. "Probably just a dream about the hospital." Ethan studied her for a moment. "You always dream about saving others. When was the last time someone saved you?" The question lingered long after she left for work. It was the kind of question that stayed under her skin, like a quiet ache. That afternoon, while Ethan attended a series of board meetings, a group of shareholders arrived unexpectedly. They had been whispering about the mystery wife for weeks, convinced the marriage was a cover to protect his position. Clara knew nothing of this storm brewing behind closed doors. By evening, Ethan's patience had run thin. "The numbers are stable," he said sharply during the meeting, "and my personal life is not up for discussion." One of the older board members smirked. "Your personal life affects the company image, Mr. Cole. Some of us wonder if this marriage even exists outside the tabloids." Ethan's voice turned cold. "It exists." "Then prove it," the man challenged. "Bring her to the shareholders' dinner next month. Let us see this wife of yours in person." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I will." Yoketa. When he came home late that night, Clara was asleep on the couch, a book open on her chest. He watched her for a long moment before draping a blanket over her. The weight of the day pressed down on him, heavier than any contract or corporate obligation. For the first time, he wondered if this marriage had already crossed the line between logic and feeling. The next morning, he found her making breakfast: burnt toast, scrambled eggs, and laughter when she noticed his raised brow. "Do not judge me," she said. "I am a nurse, not a chef." He smirked, sitting at the counter. Noted. They ate together in silence, but it was not uncomfortable. When she finished, she handed him a small envelope. "This is my resignation letter. I am leaving the hospital next month." He looked up sharply. "Why?" "I want to study full-time, advanced nursing practice. I have been accepted into a scholarship program." A hint of pride flashed in his eyes, quickly hidden. "Congratulations," he said quietly. "You did not need my help for that." "I never wanted your help," she replied, smiling gently. "Only your respect." Later that evening, Clara received a call from Mrs. Whitmore, the elderly woman from the gala. The woman's health had taken a sudden turn, and she had asked to see Ethan. Clara found him in the study, tie loosened, exhaustion etched across his face. "Ethan," she said softly, "Mrs. Whitmore is in the hospital. She asked for you." Make it. Within minutes they were in the car. The hospital corridors felt different this time, no longer a workplace, but a place that mirrored every emotion they had buried. Mrs. Whitmore looked frail, her voice thin as she smiled at them both. "You two remind me of my husband and me," she whispered. "He was all logic, and I was all heart. It took him too long to learn that both are needed to build a life worth keeping." Ethan held her hand gently. "You built something extraordinary," he said. She smiled faintly. "Then promise me you will not waste what you are building now." That night, driving home, neither spoke. The city lights flickered like distant memories across the windshield. Finally, Clara broke the silence. "She sees something in us that is not real." Ethan glanced at her. "Maybe it is becoming real." Her heart skipped. "Do you mean that?" He did not answer, but his silence said more than words ever could. In the following weeks, their rhythm changed again. They began to share breakfast, late-night conversations, small jokes about the chaos of hospital life. The cold edges around Ethan started to soften, and Clara found herself smiling more easily, even when he teased her. But peace never lasts long in a world built on secrets. One afternoon, as Ethan reviewed company reports, Rachel entered his office, her face pale. "Sir, there is something you need to see." She placed a printed email on his desk. It was from an anonymous sender, a journalist hinting at exclusive evidence of a fake marriage between the CEO and a nurse. Attached was a blurred photo of their original contract, the Helix Medical Group seal visible in the corner. Ethan's chest tightened. Where did this come from? Rachel hesitated. Someone inside the board must have leaked it. He read the line again. Helix CEO's sham marriage inside the contract that bought his reputation. Ethan's mind raced. The world would not just question him, it would destroy her. That night, Clara noticed his distance. "What is wrong?" she asked. He handed her the printed page. Her face drained of color as she read. "They know. I will handle it," Ethan said quickly. "You have done nothing wrong. But the world will not see it that way," she whispered. "They will think I married you for money." He reached for her hand. "Then I will make them see the truth." "How's?" For the first time there was fear in his eyes, not of losing power, but of losing her. And as the storm outside gathered again, both knew that the contract that once protected them was now the very thing that could destroy everything they had begun to feel. By the next morning, the rumor had exploded. Every major business outlet carried the same headline: Helix CEO's marriage exposed as a contract deal. Paparazzi crowded outside the hospital where Clara worked, cameras flashing each time a nurse in scrubs stepped out. Within hours, her supervisor called her into the office, his face uneasy. "I am sorry, Clara," he said, sliding a paper across the desk. "The board cannot afford negative publicity. You are suspended until this clears up." Clara stared at the notice, her throat tightening. "I did nothing wrong." "I know," he said softly. "But perception is everything." Kamue. When she walked out of the hospital, reporters shouted her name. "Mrs. Cole, how much did he pay you? Was the marriage just for publicity? Did you know the contract would leak?" She pushed through the noise, eyes stinging, and kept walking. The same city that once felt alive now felt like a cage built of flashing lights and whispered judgment. At the Helix headquarters, Ethan faced a storm of his own. The board demanded his resignation, citing ethical concerns and public deception. He stood at the head of the conference table, his expression composed, but his voice low with restrained anger. "I will not resign," he said. "What happened between my wife and me is private." One of the older directors sneered. "Private? The entire country is reading your marriage agreement. You used your position to protect yourself." Ethan's patience snapped. "I used it to protect her." The room fell silent. This company would not exist if not for the people who work every night under its name, including the nurse you are trying to humiliate. You can strip my title, but you will not strip her dignity. Before anyone could respond, he gathered his papers and walked out. Cameras followed him through the lobby, flashes exploding in his face. But for the first time, Ethan did not hide behind silence. He turned to the nearest reporter and said, "If you want a story, write this. I married the most honest person I have ever met. Everything else is noise." Back at the penthouse, Clara sat by the window, clutching the old pen he had given her to sign the contract months ago. The silver finish had dulled, but the weight of it still felt heavy in her palm. When Ethan entered, soaked from the rain and chaos, she looked up at him with tired eyes. "They fired me," she whispered. "I know," he said quietly. "And I stepped down." Her breath caught. "You resigned?" "I could not let them use you to destroy everything we built," he said. "If someone has to take the fall, it will be me." For a long moment, neither spoke. The city hummed outside, the world beyond their walls still judging, still spinning. Then Clara stood and walked toward him. "You did not have to do that, Ethan." He met her eyes. "Yes, I did. For the first time, this marriage is not about saving an image. It is about saving what is real." Tears blurred her vision. "They will call you a fool." He smiled faintly. "Then let them. Every empire I built was made of logic. This time, I will build something out of truth." Later that night, Ethan opened his laptop and began typing. The next morning, an official statement appeared on every major news site. It read, "The allegations regarding my marriage to Clara Hayes are true. It began as an agreement, one of necessity and circumstance. But over time, it became something far more meaningful. I am not ashamed of that truth. I am grateful for it." Effective immediately, I am transferring my shares in Helix Medical Group to a new foundation dedicated to nurses and healthcare workers, the Clara Foundation. The internet erupted again, but this time the tone shifted. Some mocked him, others admired the honesty. But the one person whose opinion mattered most simply read the statement in silence. Clara found him later on the balcony, staring at the skyline. "You should not have named it after me," she said softly. He turned toward her. "You were the one who reminded me why this company existed in the first place, to help people. That name deserves to mean something good." She stepped closer. "And what about us?" Ethan exhaled. "There is no contract left, no rules, only choice." Her voice trembled. "Then what do you choose?" He looked at her with the same calm certainty he once used to negotiate billion-dollar deals, but this time his words came from a different place. "I choose you." The silence that followed was not the kind that divides. It was the kind that heals. Clara took his hand and held it against her chest. "Then we start again," she whispered. "No signatures, no conditions, just us." Outside, the rain began to fall again, soft and forgiving, washing the city clean. And as the lights reflected off the wet streets below, Ethan Cole, once the coldest man in the room, finally allowed himself to feel what no contract could ever guarantee: peace. He pulled her close and said quietly, "This time, no one gets to write our story but us." The storm outside kept raging, but inside that room, the world had found its calm. The following weeks were quiet, almost painfully so. The noise of scandal had faded, but the silence that replaced it was heavier. Without the constant pressure of Helix Medical Group, Ethan spent his mornings reading and his evenings walking through the city like a man learning to live again. Clara returned to the hospital once the chaos subsided, not as Mrs. Cole, but as Nurse Hayes once more. People whispered, of course. Some looked at her with pity, others with envy. Yet when she put on her uniform and tied her hair back, the world narrowed to the simple rhythm of care and duty. Her patients did not care who she had married. They only cared that she showed up. Every night she came home to find Ethan waiting. Sometimes they talked about work, sometimes about nothing at all. The distance that had once defined them was now a quiet companionship built on mutual respect. But beneath the peace, Clara sensed something unsettled in him, an unspoken guilt that he had yet to release. One evening, she found him sitting on the balcony, staring at the skyline. "You cannot keep living in regret, Ethan," she said gently. He did not turn around. "I destroyed my own company, Clara. Everything I worked for is gone." "You did not destroy it," she replied. "You rebuilt it into something better. You gave people hope. That is more than profit ever did." He looked at her finally, his eyes softer than she had ever seen. "How do you always know what to say?" She smiled faintly. "Because I have spent my life listening." A week later, an invitation arrived, a request from the hospital board, asking Ethan to attend a charity event in support of the new nursing foundation. Clara was listed as the honorary guest. She hesitated when she read it. "Are you sure you want to go back there, after everything?" Ethan nodded. "It is time." The night of the event, the ballroom was filled with doctors, nurses, and patients whose lives had been touched by the foundation. When Ethan and Clara walked in together, the room fell into a hush. No cameras, no flashing lights, just quiet admiration. The host approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we celebrate the first year of the Clara Foundation, a project that began not from wealth, but from compassion." Clara's hands trembled slightly as the applause rose. Ethan leaned close and whispered, "You earned every bit of this." After the speeches, a young nurse approached them shyly. "Mrs. Cole, sorry, Miss Hayes," she said, flustered. "I just wanted to thank you. Because of the foundation, I was able to stay in school. I would not be here without you both." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. She reached out and squeezed the girl's hand. "Then promise me you will pass that kindness forward." Later, as the music swelled and the crowd mingled, Ethan guided Clara to the edge of the dance floor. "We never danced at our wedding," he said softly. She smiled, because it was not a real one. He held out his hand. "Then let us have our first real dance." As they swayed under the lights, the past seemed to fade, the contracts, the rumors, the fear. All that remained was the warmth of a man who had once been cold, and the quiet strength of a woman who had taught him how to love. When the song ended, Ethan whispered, "Do you still believe in logic over love?" She laughed softly. "Not anymore," he smiled. "Then maybe we are both finally free." Kuh. For the first time, the silence between them felt complete, not empty, not uncertain, but whole. And somewhere between the fading music and the hum of applause, their story finally began to feel like home. The night of the charity event marked a turning point neither of them had expected. For the first time, Ethan and Clara walked side by side not as a business arrangement, but as two people who had finally earned peace. Yet peace never comes without a test. A few days later, Ethan received a call from a global health corporation offering to buy Helix Medical Group. The deal was enormous, worth millions. They wanted him back not as a scapegoat, but as the face of the merger. "We will restore your reputation," the executive promised. "All you need to do is sign and distance yourself from the Clara Foundation. The board thinks it is a distraction." Ethan listened quietly, then hung up without replying. But the decision weighed on him all night. Clara noticed the tension in his shoulders when he returned home. "What happened?" she asked. "They want me back," he said simply. "That sounds like good news," she replied, though his expression told her otherwise. "They want me to walk away from the foundation," he said. "They called it sentimental, unprofitable." Clara's heart sank. "And what did you tell them?" "I told them I would think about it." She looked at him carefully. "And what do you think?" He rubbed his forehead, his voice low. "I spent my life building things that looked perfect on paper. This is the first time I built something that actually matters. But part of me still craves control, Clara. The world I left behind still calls to me." Clara walked closer, resting her hand on his arm. "Control never healed you. Compassion did. Do not trade that for a title." He turned toward her, and for a long moment said nothing. Then he whispered, "You have more courage than I ever will." The next morning, Ethan called the corporation back. His voice was steady as he declined the offer. "I have already signed something far more important," he said. It was not a business contract, it was a promise. When he hung up, he stood in silence, the kind that feels like freedom. For the first time in years, his choice had not been guided by logic, but by love. Later that week, Clara found him sitting in the garden of the hospital, watching volunteers plant flowers around a small plaque that read the Clara Foundation Community Wing. The sight brought a quiet smile to her face. "It feels unreal," she said softly. "It is very real," Ethan replied. "Every brick here is more valuable than every boardroom I ever sat in." She sat beside him, sunlight warming their faces. "Do you regret anything?" "Only that I took so long to find what matters," he said. "But if losing everything was the price of meeting you, I would pay it again." For a while they sat in silence, listening to the sound of children laughing in the distance. It was the kind of laughter that reminded them both of everything they had fought for, the dignity, the healing, the justice behind every act of kindness. Clara turned to him. "You once told me you do not believe in love, only in logic." Ethan smiled faintly. "Then logic must have failed spectacularly, because here I am." "Arjog," she laughed, resting her head against his shoulder. "Maybe love was the only thing that ever made sense." As the sun dipped behind the hospital roof, Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver pen, the same one from the night of their contract. He held it out to her. "You signed a deal with this once," he said. "Now I want you to sign something else with no terms, no limits." Clara looked at him, her heart full. "What am I signing?" "Our future," he said simply. And in that moment, under the fading glow of the evening light, she realized that every mistake, every storm, and every contract had led them to this, an agreement not written on paper, but written in the quiet trust between two hearts that had finally learned how to heal. A year later, spring returned to Texas. The garden outside the hospital was in full bloom. The same garden where the plaque for the Clara Foundation now stood. Nurses passed by carrying trays of seedlings, laughter mixing with the sound of birds. Clara walked among them, wearing a white dress instead of her usual scrubs. It was simple, but beautiful, quiet like her. That morning, the hospital had prepared a small ceremony to celebrate the foundation's anniversary. What most people did not know was that Ethan had planned something else entirely. When she arrived, the courtyard was filled with familiar faces, doctors, volunteers, even patients she had once cared for. A gentle breeze carried the scent of lavender and rain. At the center of the garden stood Ethan, dressed in a gray suit, holding a small box in his hand. She froze, heart racing. "Ethan, what are you doing?" He smiled, stepping forward. "Do you remember the night we signed that contract? You told me one rule: do not treat me like property. You were right. Back then, I did not understand what love meant. But you taught me that love is not ownership, it is partnership. And now, I want to rewrite our story without paper, without rules." He opened the box. Inside was a ring made of white gold, simple and elegant. But beside it lay the old silver pen she had used to sign their contract, polished and restored. "I kept it," he said softly, "because it was the beginning of everything. You turned a deal into a life. You turned a lonely man into someone capable of hope. So today, I am asking not as a CEO, not as a contract, but as a man who loves you." The crowd fell silent as he knelt before her. "Clara Hayes," he said, voice trembling slightly, "will you marry me again for real this time?" Tears welled in her eyes. "You already know the answer," she whispered. He smiled, slipping the ring onto her finger as applause filled the garden. The sound was soft but powerful, like rain finally touching dry ground. When they kissed, it was not the beginning of a deal, it was the end of every doubt that had ever stood between them. Later, during the reception, Ethan spoke to the gathered crowd. "This foundation was built from a contract," he said, "but it survived because of compassion. What started as an arrangement became a reminder that kindness can rewrite any story." "Oh." Clara watched him with pride, realizing how far they had both come from strangers bound by necessity to partners united by choice. As the sun dipped low, casting gold across the garden, Ethan turned to her and whispered, "Do you know what the best part of this year was?" She shook her head, smiling. "What?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the old contract, edges worn from time. "The best part was breaking every rule we wrote." "Ko Kwong," she laughed through her tears. "Then let us never write another one." He leaned in close. "Deal." The crowd cheered once more as they stood together beneath the archway of flowers, sunlight dancing through the petals. The same pen that had once sealed their fate now rested between them, no longer a symbol of control but of promise. A soft voiceover carried through the final image. "It started as a contract, but love rewrote every term. True leadership is not power, it is compassion. And true love is not found in perfection, but in choosing each other every single day." As the camera faded to the horizon, the last scene held steady on their joined hands, the silver pen gleaming in the sunlight, a reminder that even the coldest heart can be healed when love is written in action, not ink.